Law, a practical solution to practical problems. So why do I say this? Because law looks at problems in a very different way. Now take a look at the symbol of law. The female, the blindfolded, forget about what she has on the left hand. The balance means kind of equity or equality in justice. Doesn't always happen. And look at the sword on the right hand. And mind you, it's a double-edged sword. Quick, swift, and blind. That's what the law is. So this is why law is completely different to any subject that mankind learns. Law has a lot of goods. We'll talk about that, but let's focus on the double-edged aspect, the negative aspect of law first. It will be better learning that. In fact, the most wrongs in the history of humanity have been according to law. Let me begin with this. Hiroshima, Nagasaki 2 days later. Is in fact, yes, the biggest massacre of children ever in the history of mankind. Hiroshima and Nagasaki combined would have killed, we don't know the real figures. There was no one to count the number of bodies, but we actually feel that up to 200,000 people died immediately. Nobody knows the deaths thereafter. And most of the deaths were children and women and then elderly. Vast majority of them children. United States Air Force, under direct orders of the President of the United States, targeted a bedroom city, Hiroshima. It was not a military target. It was daytime in Hiroshima, early morning at 9 something, and US forces would have easily known that at such a time of the day, during wartime, in a bedroom city like this, vast majority of the people staying in town at that time, it was a huge city, was women and children and elderly. And with that knowledge only, they would have definitely, it was a predetermined hit. It was no accident. It was a planned attack. Actually, US forces were planning, the story says, to hit up to 10 cities, one after the other, until the Japanese surrendered. And surrender they did after the second hit on Nagasaki 2 days later. Worst results. This is legally okay. United States is they've never ever apologized for it. The particular bomber crews who hit both cities, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, were given the highest decoration for valor, bravery in the United States Air Force. 2 presidents have visited Hiroshima. Barack Obama as a president, Jimmy Carter as an ex-president. They never said a word against it. Even today, America is yet to accept it as a mistake. They say it was a necessary action, even today, for the vast murder. Legally okay. And which country committed the world's biggest ever massacre of a population? Don't look at Hitler for it. You have to go through him. It's a massacre of the Red Indians in the vast plains of Americas. Take a look at the map, the small though, right? By 1650s, 1770s, take a look. Huge swaths of America was populated by the Red Indians, millions of them. It is a massive continent, several hundred times bigger than Sri Lanka, and it was pretty much a fertile plains. From Appalachians to the Rockies, in between, it was thoroughly fed by huge rivers like Mississippi. And there lived massive number of communities, not just one community, various types of ethnic groups, and together they were called as Red Indians. And look at the nature of the map as it went on to 1930s, only the reservations. And the story says there were 100 million Red Indians. Well, it cannot be that big in my opinion, but definitely bigger than at least half that. What happened to that people today? They're no longer there, right? Several 100,000 mixed-blooded Red Indian slaves, just 100,000 also pure Red Indian slaves. The rest of the population were exterminated by the United States. Since 1776 until the start of the First World War in 1930s, America passed a law called the Indians Removal Act. Under the particular act, American Senate and the Congress, of course, at the behest of the presidency, gave direct powers to the US military, the sheriffs, and the local militias to attack Red Indians villages, one after the other. Normally, it's not a unknown story in the history of the world wars, world affairs. People attack others, but there was something special in the way United States went about Red Indians. They first destroyed the entire yak population of buffalo population of American plains to deprive the Red Indians of their main food, this particular buffalo. You can see the, you see a photo of a huge mountain of buffalo skulls. This is, and yeah, they didn't stop at that. They attacked villages one after the other. Not just the men, they were directly targeting the women. You kill men, okay, the next generation could create the population. Sri Lanka was attacked multiple times by the Kalinga Maga, and there were others, right? Portuguese, they were not exactly darlings in Sri Lanka. There were huge casualties. Look at the British attack on Vellasa. More than 100,000 Sri Lankans were killed in 1818 in Vellasa attack, in the rebellion. But we survived multiple times despite these attacks. But what's unique in this action by United States, they were targeting women as well. And you destroy women, that's the end of the line, and that's what happened to the Red Indians. Check the history. Here and there you can see, right? So it's bigger than what Hitler did. Legally, okay. America passed a law for this. Australia. There's a thing called the stolen generation. For about 100 years or so, until the 1970s, Australia used to capture Aborigine children from their parents against their will and put them into boarding schools. By law, under a law, Australia did not count the Aborigines among people. They used to calculate among them as among animals, actually. They didn't even get the, the standard of the human state in the census, in the Janagahana Sanggana Varta. So what did they do to these people? What they did was, they trained them how to be, servants. They taught them on the language, they taught them on the Christianity, they banned them in speaking their own mother tongues. And this is how Australia settled their servant problems in quite a number of the territories in the early days. They went on with the practice until the 1980s. Later, of course, they said, sorry, but the damage is already done. And an Australian president Prime Minister, actually, called Kevin Rudd, I believe, right? He said, sorry, but no compensation, nothing was paid. Real numbers are not known, but at least definitely over 100,000 Aborigines. It's a vast majority of their population. The native Australians, right, were kept for slavery, literally, right? Taking these children, training them only for that, and then using them for their own work. Legally, okay. No one was punished. It was national government policy of Australia. Yeah, 1909 to 1969, but habit went on even after that. And the real figures, not known. It went on further. This, of course, done by the British with the support of the Australian government. We call them the home children. Australia, Canada, to a certain extent, New Zealand as well, used to import children from England, Britain. These young children, as young as 2 or 3, about 3, 4, 5 years old, from England, to these territories, because in the early days, these countries, Australia included, Canada, was short of people. And people were less willing to visit these countries. They would prefer USA. So one way of maintaining a good population of whites would be bringing the children. And these children were actually, as young as this. They were orphan children from the orphanages. Who would live in an orphanage? Normally, yeah, children abandoned by the parents, perhaps, but mostly children handed over by the parents because they were not in position to take care of them. And they were brought to Australia, brought to Canada, brought to New Zealand also to a certain extent, against the knowledge of the parents, against the will of their parents, against the will of their children. And they brought them by the hundreds of thousands, hundreds, thousands. We don't know the real number. Official numbers are unknown. At least 100,000, but the real number could be higher. See how young were they? And they were, put in to foster families. Again, these children are mostly abused by the, the families. The hard living in Australia must have been, as they were literally the servant children. And even now, in Australia, these people are now, they are older people. They are demanding the Australian government to say sorry, and it's yet to come. Laws are done for really nasty things. South of Sri Lanka, we have an island called Garcia Island. It's about 800 miles, about 1,200 nautical miles south of Sri Lanka, bit south of Maldives, the Chagos archipelago, we call it. And if you look at an Indian Ocean island, yes, it should be lots of fields, coconut trees, houses thatched, and children on the beach, boats for fishing. You see none of that in Diego Garcia Island. It's a completely military island. These people are not there. For $14 million of a discount, United States bought this island, actually leased this island from Britain. Every person in this island was removed. Every dog and cat was killed. Chicken they would have eaten. And it's a military island, thousands of miles away from America. It's an island where it's a huge lagoon, what you can see here, where you could even put up an entire fleet of the US Navy, and one or two airfields where even today they have B-52 planes with the capacity to carry nuclear devices. What happened to the people? Well, they are living in various towns in like Mauritius, Seychelles, Madagascar, some of the main African towns as just squatter people. They would never ever get the right to come back to the island. Several years ago, British House of Lords, British highest court, given a decision that the island should be given back, but it was flatly rejected by the British. And so America stays a direct violation of a law, right? Sorry, violation of their rights, but it's completely legally okay. This is okayed by the British Parliament, okayed by the American Senate. Legally all right. They call him the butcher of Moscow. But he's the most favorite personality, if I may use a word, in Russia to date. During his time, he was the leader number 2 of Russia, Soviet Union, sorry, after V.I. Lenin. During his time, he used to send thousands of people into the Siberian gulags, the work camps, right, to produce the necessary food. And he forced them into, especially in places like Ukraine, millions of people died when he banned private farms and made them collective farms. Initially, they were utter failures. And the results were a huge number of people died. Funny thing is, he's still a hero. So killers don't end up as villains, right? Sometimes, yeah. And whatever he did was legally okay. This is done according to the laws of the Soviet Union. China. 1990s, they created the one and only law, right? One family, one kid. And the result, there's a huge gender imbalance in China. There's a vastly higher number of men compared to the women, because when the Chinese government ordered that a family in urban China can have only one kid, most of them would have preferred to have a boy child in their culture, not like in Sri Lankan culture where we prefer the first child to be a girl. But of course, we don't have this law, right? One kid. And families used to kill the female fetus or abandon the baby children if they find them to be the girl children. And they would, they would wait for the, chance to be getting the boy child. And this killed unbelievable number of people. We call it the gendercide. And China was one nation who did it in the records in the earlier times. Since earlier times. Now, China has moved away from it, but when it was going on, it was legally all right. It brought the population down. India, they forcibly sterilized. This is worse than China. During the reign of Indira Gandhi, this is what she did. 2014 article, this I got from the net, so about 40 plus years now. When she was the Prime Minister of India, she forcibly ordered the sterilization of both women and men. Again, the records are very murky, but at least up to 30 million men were sterilized. Men who were fathers with at least 3 or more kids, especially in the northern and even in the southern states of India. And women, how many Indian women were sterilized in these poor states? Nobody knows the numbers. This was done against the will of the Indian population. And come on, this is against the virtual religion of India, right? Hinduism or Islam for that matter. Legally all right. Completely legally okay. What about Sri Lanka? Yeah, there's a part of Sri Lanka which is not in our history books. Or we don't learn, right? 1971. In that bloody month of April, the story says Sri Lanka lost up to 17,000 young men and women. That's how JVP rebellion was crushed by the Sri Lankan government. It was such a short period, right? Just one or 2 months maximum. There was a huge number of killings. Nobody was punished for those. You may have heard about the Premavati Manamperi case, but that was an offshoot incident, not direct as a result of this. And some of the photos of that time. And, the story talks about, the Ambatale pumping station getting clogged because of the dead bodies floating down the Kalani River. And in 88, 89, again, we don't know the numbers. Some say more than 60,000 young people died. I remember this era somewhat well because I was a kid and Kandy wasn't, a nice place to live those days. And again, immense brutalities we had. Whatever you see, what Taliban is doing in Afghanistan, ask your father. He may have seen it in Sri Lanka. So it was pretty tough action, both by the JVP. They were brutal. I remember that well. And the various government forces, official and unofficial, the militant, vigilante groups and the paramilitaries and all that. No legal actions, legally okay. 71 crushing as well as 89 crushing of the JVP. And, look at the numbers. Definitely over 110,000, maybe even more young people died during this era. They were legally all right. The actions done by the governments of the day were legally okay. The 30-year war. Starting from the late 1970s, mostly from the 1983 onward, 1980 upward. The carnage of our war, right, for nearly 30 years was unbelievable. There's nothing called a nice war. Every war is a dirty war. And most of the victims in any war are children, and women and innocents, and same in Sri Lanka. There were horrendous actions by both sides in the war. Any legal actions? Nothing. How a government fights a war is always legally all right. That's a reality in any country. Whether it's Britain in Ireland, or France in Algeria, America in Iraq, or Afghanistan, or the British in their empire, or the Soviet Union in most of their countries, even us, India, right? It's the same story. War is a brutality done legally. Okay, now, is it really necessary to go into this? Answer is yes. Now, I think I showed the Hiroshima, Nagasaki actions. Exactly why did America got pushed into that? Why did America did it? Well, it's mostly due to the way Japan resisted the war. And Japanese army was no walkover, even in the worst days of time. Initially, Japan was winning the war, but then they were picking up on the war. I mean, after being hit hard by the Americans, but they were not giving up easily. The first two islands, America did an island hopping way of taking over Pacific from the Japanese. Initially, entire Pacific belonged to the Japanese army, Japanese Navy, but then America took it back one by one. America had the numbers and their mighty industrial potential. Japan didn't have that. So it was, a foregone conclusion that Japan would lose the war. But the lose it, they didn't do it easily. The first two islands to be captured from Japan they were Japanese islands, right? Japanese owned island by Okinawa, refusing to surrender to the American forces. So there were just two blocks of islands here, and Iwo Jima was here, way down south. And America had the justifiable fear, I believe, that, the similar and the worst would happen right throughout Japan if America started attacking Japan. Then only I think they came up with the bomb plan, the bomb theory, right? The A-bomb solution, so-called. And yes, the bad thing, 2 cities were destroyed, 200,000 people butchered, just murdered, right, in a brutal manner. But Japan surrendered. And the war ended. It saved a lot of lives of Japanese, of course, the American soldiers as well. But come to think of it, it helped Japan to come back up fast, because when Japan lost the Second World War, surrendered, their industrial machinery, apparatus was intact, the engineers, the scientists, the labs, universities, they were all intact. So it was easy for Japan to come back up. The bombs actually helped, in a way, Japan also. What about China and Britain? India? Had not China and India gone for this brutal bringing down of the population, see how Chinese population crashed down from the 1980s, how they brought it down from, 1 to 2 actually, right? Way down by the strict enforcement of child policy. Had not they done it, by now world would have easily had a 10 billion population. India would have had 3 billion by now. China definitely more than that. And we would have technically got wasted as a planet. It was very brutal actions by China and India, but bringing down of the populations by both these nations helped the world. Now we have a terror waiting to happen, right? The Nigerian population will outpace the Chinese population within the next 60, 70 years. It will have more people than in China. And the US population is increasing, but Indian and Chinese population bringing down. That will result in some problems, because most of the manufacturing will have to be taken out of India and China due to population issues. But still, the number control helped. Chinese population will go down further. That's the projection, even with the 2 kids. Now the Chinese are demanding or begging people to have. But when the cultures are changed, the cultures don't change back faster. Habits don't change back in a population that fast. So we see the Chinese population going down. There will be negatives, no wonder, no question about it. But the positive would be the drastic bringing down of the population. And this cannot be done by religion, no culture, whatever. You need law for these kind of things. Bad, ugly, dirty, but a necessary thing. Stalingrad, why they love Stalin so much in Russia? It's because of the way Stalin brought up Russia. Within 2 decades, he made Russia self-sufficient in food. He made Russia industrially capable, second only to United States. Of course, his tactics, his actions are brutal, violent, murderous. So much of Russians were killed during his time. And the other thing, the way he fought back Adolf Hitler. His leadership, his actions, right, were the pivotal reasons in the defeat of Adolf Hitler. Hitler lost to Soviet Union. That's how he lost the war. And Hitler's game plan was to somehow capture the Soviet oil fields, because Hitler's, the Panzer divisions, all completely mechanized divisions, badly needed oil. Germany did not have oil. Arabian oil was too far off. In Egypt, as well as in Libya, his closest place was Russia, and Stalin prevented Hitler from reaching the oil fields. And that was the end of Hitler. Russia, or Soviet Union then, still loves, Stalin for this, despite his brutalities. There's a law called Doctrine on Necessity. In a nutshell, it means whenever a country is under threat, country can do anything to defend itself. That's what Sri Lankan government did with regard to JVP twice over, and the destruction of the LTT, and the methods of brutal, violent, but they were legally all right. Sri Lanka passed a state of emergency. We passed a brutally and very, very bad, ugly Prevention of Terrorism Act, an act we still suffer from even today. And so much of things during that time were never brought before the law. Of course, Sri Lanka can defend itself by telling so many other countries did it. So yes, they did it. Right? British never punished their soldiers for the wrongs done during the empire. America never did, Russia never did. That's no reason for us to be wrong, but that's the way of the world. Whenever a country is under threat, the country uses this doctrine. We call it the doctrine of necessity. It's applicable to our own homes. I'll discuss this in the criminal law. If I just jump the gun here, if you are at home, if your home is under threat from an outside force, you can even kill the attacker. That's a doctrine of necessity for you. If someone enters your land without your permission, with the, seemingly, level of threat that could cause danger to your lives, you can kill him back before he does his act. That's a doctrine of necessity. So that's the level of protection the law gives power, a family or an individual to defend himself. The same power is there for the country. A group of individuals, millions of individuals together. And the Indian massacres, the same reason. America wanted the lands. Indians are refusing to share the lands because that's their homeland, right? In America, the Indians would bury their dead, and they would call the land, the area where the person was buried, as the the area of the Holy Ghost, should be protected. Yeah, this as well as the cultural habits of Indians, who Americans are technically invaders coming in by the millions from Europe. Indians didn't want to go back, hand over the lands. America forcibly took it over by making every Indian become a ghost. Diego Garcia, in a way, prevented the Russia-US conflict in the Indian Ocean. Indian Ocean became one of the most peaceful oceans thanks to the mighty military base in the middle of the Indian Ocean. And that helped the region also. Poor Indian people. Population control, definitely. Right? By force. And mind you, Sri Lanka wasn't easily nice to the Vedda community, right? We basically abandoned the Vedda community straight out of the jungle. When we created the Madurai project, put them in a village. It's a violation it's a horrendous violation of their human rights. Only the Ratugala and Nilgala Vedda population had some of their rights protected. But the Dambana Vedda population lost all of it in order to protect wildlife. That's what we thought. We took their life away from them. Wrongs. But legally okay. Some of the movies for you to take a look at it, they make you a kind of a Oranges and Sunshine is about the, they make you a kind of a hint of part of it, exactly how things happen to be. Like it's about this so-called the children that were brought from UK. Rabbit-proof fence is about the way Australia, terrorized the Aborigine population. 7 years in Tibet, it's about how China took over an entire nation brutally by decree. Independence of Tibet was wiped off. Dr. Chivago, Stalin Times, and Dances with the Wolves. It's about, the Red Indian population. So take a look at it if you might. So, the law has all the goods. Law is justice. No, law is never justice. Remember that justice is one thing, law is another. Yes, everything Hitler did was legal because he was the law. Nazism was the law. So what the German army did was follow the law of the country. But the American army did mostly in Iraq, Afghanistan, was following the law of their country. What the British army did in the entire empire was that. What's Taliban doing in Afghanistan is also the same. Their law. So law is not always just. Law could be really ugly, dirty, and bad. But no action can be taken when you do a wrong thing according to our culture and the conscience, right? But if it's according to law, there's little we can do against it. So whatever Hitler did was legal. But this is not the purpose of the law. Remember, law and justice are two different things. Law is technically the will of the majority of the people. Justice is what's fair by everybody. So it's no easy thing changing a law. It's no easy thing destroying a law. So revolutions come because of that. The purpose of a revolution is to destroy a law, to come up with a new law. It doesn't always end up in success, right? So, and sometimes the results are also not the same. So it's very hard for a nation to change its law easily. Of course, there are ways like the parliament and all that we do, but change of the law is a necessity in any nation. It's a public conscience, and it's not a nice thing. Sometimes our public conscience is wrong. Now, take a look at violence against children in Sri Lanka. Our public conscience is that the children should be hit. So the caning of the children, public, even public, violence against the children, right? Corporal punishment is a pretty practice in 1990s, until 1990s. Some of you may have been hit by your teachers. It's a violence, it's wrong, it's illegal. No, but for public of Sri Lanka, it was perfectly okay for much of our independence history. That's a public conscience. So we cannot always say that the public conscience is the right one. It's not that. Law is not justice. Sometimes for the justice to begin, the law has to take a backseat. It will be really fair for a nation when the justice takes the first step and the law is made according to justice. I don't know any country in the world that has done that. Every nation uses law to achieve their own aims. And some of their aims are not exactly good at all. So law is a bad cousin of a number of things that we follow. And true, it's a people who make the law. It's a people who, not a government. It's the people of this country who wanted JVP crushed. It's the people of the country, majority, vast majority, who wanted the LTTE to be destroyed. And it's the people of this country who still hold on to some of the laws which are unfair to women in Sri Lanka. It's the people of this country who still, in double minds about the violence against children of Sri Lanka. And it's the people of this country who don't want to have tougher laws against alcohol in Sri Lanka. So the eventual blame should fall on the people because law is created by the people. And Martin Luther King was so right? The silence of the people is the biggest wrong. And that's one reason sometimes why the bad law still exists. Sri Lanka still keeps on Prevention of Terrorism Act. How many years now? 10 years after war, because of public conscience is still we have terrorism. We have to have systems to protect ourselves. Until the people change, we cannot change this law. The reality is that.